In January 2023, the 27th of January was a signing between the Consortium Turisme per Million with actors in the tourism industry. With just days before old Naira notes had to be phased out, Nigerian lawmakers and the Senate have asked the central bank to delay putting new Naira notes into circulation. Burkina Faso's Prime Minister, on a visit to neighboring Mali, has suggested the two countries form a federation. Good afternoon, our dear viewers. Welcome to the 1 p.m. news edition, coming to you live and direct from Golfe TV Africa here in the city of Cotonou with Hazel OGOIGBE. Now to the news in detail, starting from the news in brief. Now, elder statesman and First Republic Federal Commissioner for Information in Nigeria, Chief Edwin Clark, on Thursday came down hard on the Delta State Governor Ifeanyi Okowa, saying he will not succeed in his desire to become the nation Nigeria's next vice president. Now, Okowa is the running mate to the presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party, Atiku Abubakar, and Clark made his position known in an open letter addressed to Okowa dated the 2nd of February 2023, titled "Your Dictatorial Government and the Reign of Unaccountability in Delta State, Nigeria." Crossing over to Burkina Faso, Burkina Faso's first prime minister, in a visit to neighboring Mali this week, has suggested the two countries form a federation to boost their economic clout. Now, the two landlocked Sahelian countries rank among the poorest and the most volatile nations in the world and have experienced few periods of calm since independence. More information in the following report.
Burkina Faso's Prime Minister, in a visit to neighboring Mali this week, has suggested the two countries form a federation to boost their economic clout, his office said. Both nations are battling jihadist insurgencies and are run by juntas who have turned away from France.
Sovereignty, freedom of choice of its partners, stubborn defense of the interests of the Malian people. I'm sure that these principles are shared by all the countries that want to take charge of themselves and our brothers and friends in Burkina Faso. I am convinced must have similar demands.
Kelem de Tambele referred to a past effort to forge a federation in Francophone West Africa, a stillborn bid to bring together Mali, Senegal, Burkina Faso and Benin shortly before they gained independence from France in 1960.
Experience our ideas and enrich ourselves with the ideas and experiences of others, especially our brothers and sisters with whom we have the same goal.
The two landlocked Sahel countries rank among the poorest and most volatile nations in the world and have experienced few periods of calm since independence. They're also battling a brutal jihadist insurgency that has claimed thousands of lives, driven more than 2 million from their homes, and prompted military takeovers of the elected government. Both nations have expelled French forces frustrated by failure to defeat the militant insurgency. Kelem de Tambele hailed the genuine revolution he said had taken place in Mali since Colonel Assimi Goïta seized power in 2020, and said it had inspired the new military rulers in Burkina. Burkina and Mali have each witnessed two military coups since 2020 and are under pressure from the international community to return to democratic civilian rule. Creating a new federation should be undertaken now before power is returned to civilians, because when the politicians get back in, it will be tricky, Kelem de Tambela said.
Still on the news in brief, Meta, formerly Facebook, has announced plans to activate an election operations center for the 2023 general elections in Nigeria. Now, Meta stated that this is going to be to help ensure a safe and secure general elections in Nigeria. It was investing in people and technology to reduce the spread of misinformation and remove harmful content across its apps. It disclosed this in a post titled How Meta is Preparing for Nigeria's 2023 general elections by the head of public policy for Anglophone West Africa, Adora Ikenze. Away from that stone, the African team crossing over to Zimbabwe. Now, Zimbabwe hopes to boycott the analysts of the opinion that Zimbabwe seeks assistance from the sanctioned Belarus in order to dodge Western demands on human rights. More information in the following report.
After years of letting the country's farmers mostly plow and seed their fields by hand, Zimbabwe's government has started large-scale mechanization of its agriculture industry, which has suffered from low productivity for years. The equipment comes from Belarus. 28-year-old farmer Mufudzi Madzorera received a tractor and is encouraging others to use agricultural machinery too.
I managed to do over 100 hectares of land. I ripped it and plowed it at my own time, at my own pace. And it's way better than hiring out. Hiring out, it consumes time and honestly it becomes more expensive. Owning your own tractor is cheaper because the government of Zimbabwe is then giving us an option whereby you can pay for this in a period of 5 years.
Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko visited Zimbabwe on January 3rd, bringing with him 1,000 tractors and other agricultural equipment.
Despite the distance that separates us, we are ready to cooperate with you, to get everything you need, to give you a helping hand, anywhere, anytime, help you address all the issues, all the problems that you have.
Belarus is the subject of US and European sanctions for supporting Russia's war on Ukraine, something Zimbabwe's president addressed.
Both Belarus and Zimbabwe are serious candidates of sanctions. So it is not surprising to see victims of sanctions cooperating.
The US, the EU and other Western nations imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe's leadership in the early 2000s following reports of election rigging and human rights abuses. Political analyst Alexander Rosero explains why he thinks Zimbabwe has turned to Belarus.
Zimbabwe is trying to modulate isolation, to modulate sanctions by going to those states that Zimbabwe perceives to be safer and better to deal with, because those kinds of dealings, they do not come with any form of conditionalities such as democracy, such as issues of human rights, etc., which normally the West insists on.
Agriculture was once Zimbabwe's economic backbone until the land reform program of late President Robert Mugabe drove experienced farmers off their land in the early 2000s and sent farm production into a downward spiral. With help from Belarus, the government hopes it can revive the sector and rejuvenate the long-struggling economy.
Chadian President Mahamat Idris Deby Itno on Thursday opened his majority Muslim country's first embassy in Israel 4 years after the country renewed ties following a decade-long rupture, an Israeli statement stated. Now, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu's office, called the embassy's inauguration in Ramat Gan near Tel Aviv a historic moment. Netanyahu said in 2020 that he had discussed possibilities of opening an embassy in Jerusalem with a Chadian delegation. Still on the African scene, the past year saw little progress in tackling global corruption due to great violence and insecurity, according to the organization Transparency International. Now, their annual index measures citizens' perception of the level of corruption in Africa. More information in the following report.
For the 6th year running, South Sudan, Syria and Somalia are at the bottom of Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index. The report says conflict and corruption create a vicious cycle.
Having weak and corrupt police and defense sectors, including also here other law enforcement organizations or institutions such as the courts or the judiciary itself, it is very unlikely that we will be able to tackle organized crime or the effects of organized crime and terrorism.
The report says Russia's invasion of Ukraine last February exemplifies the threat that corruption poses for global security. The authors say Russian oligarchs have amassed fortunes by pledging loyalty to President Vladimir Putin, who operates with impunity in the absence of any checks on power. Transparency International says perceived corruption worsened in Brazil under former President Jair Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro's supporters attacked the parliament, Supreme Court and presidential palace following his election loss in January.
It is much easier for corruption to occur when these checks and balances are weaker. That's why one of our main recommendations this year and also in the past has been to really focus on establishing very clear separation of powers across the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive whenever we have those three branches of power.
The index ranks 180 countries by the perceived level of corruption, using data from 13 external sources, including the World Bank. Denmark, Finland and Norway top the index. But several European countries are at historic lows, including Britain, which has slipped 10 places in the past 5 years, following a series of political scandals. Some African nations have made significant progress, including Angola, Ivory Coast, Ethiopia and Senegal.
7 of the 24 countries that we see improving are actually in Africa. So this is one of the regions that is stuck at the bottom of the index, but where we also see progress happening.
Transparency International said governments must do more to tackle corruption by reinforcing checks and balances on power and upholding rights to information.
A group of 6 teachers were arrested and suspended in Kenya on Thursday after a video of primary school pupils being forced to simulate sex as punishment caused an outcry in Kenya. Now, in a 29-second video that has gone viral, 4 boys in school uniforms simulate sex act under a tree in the schoolyards as teachers watch. In the background, the 6 teachers can be heard chatting and laughing as a shirtless child wipes tears from his face. Back to Nigeria. We're just days before old notes are to be phased out. That's the Naira note. Nigerian lawmakers in the Senate have asked the central bank to delay putting the new Naira notes into circulation until the end of July. More information in the following report.
Extend the use of all notes by 6 months from January 31st to July 31st, 2023. Those in favor say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it.
Nigerian lawmakers vote for an extension of the central bank's deadline for the use of the old Naira notes. This is coming barely 4 days before the old notes are finally phased out. But there are rising concerns about the difficulty in accessing the new ones.
The concern will be that the notes are not available for exchange, so that might not be a feasible plan.
Trying to make us get the older notes back to the banks and all of that, and yet you are not providing us with the new Naira notes, and it's not going to work.
Despite the resolution of lawmakers and frustration of citizens, the central bank isn't prepared to extend the January 31st deadline.
For us, 90 days, in fact, we feel is 100 days is enough for anybody who has money or the old currency to deposit it, the money in the banks. And we took every measure to ensure that all the banks were open or remain still open to receive all old currencies.
Among other things, the central bank wants to mop up excess cash in circulation and push its cashless policy.
The central bank is deliberate because if you are mopping the excess liquidity in the economy, you don't have to release the new currency as soon as. The best way to do it is to recover all the mutilated and redesign the old note into the bank, then possibly now to push the required amount of liquidity into the economy. It is not expected that the CBN will automatically return the same number of old note into the economy.
There are limited banks in the rural communities across Nigeria where 70% of the nation's population reside. Stakeholders are pushing for the central bank to strengthen financial inclusion across rural areas.
Good afternoon, our dear viewers. You're still tuned into the 1 p.m. news edition on Golfe TV Africa. And this is the African Newspaper Review, where I give you a review of the stories that are trending on the top page of various African stories. Now, today, let's get started with our neighbor Nigeria. What is trending on the pages of the Punch Nigeria? Now, let us start with a very hot topic in Nigeria right now. And this is the new Naira crisis. Now, AFRCA forces inciting Nigerians against APC, that's on politics, and El Rufai, one of the governors in Nigeria, is speaking. And if you look behind that story, you see the story that says Cabal misinforming President Buhari and Atiku, the presidential candidate from the People's Democratic Party, benefiting from Naira confusion. Kaduna State Governor El Rufai speaks. Still on the pages of the Punch Nigeria, come out to vote even if they devalue Naira drastically, Tinubu tells supporters. And still on the pages of the Punch Nigeria, the story says CBN policy inflicting pain on the masses. NLC and TUC and Niger State Governor speak on the pages of the Punch Nigeria. Let's go over to politics. This story says PDP knocks weekend accuses the governor of anti-party activities on pages 12. Below that story, still on the Naira note, it says bandits display new Naira notes and experts indict bankers. Now let me give a brief history of, a brief history of this Naira notes crisis in Nigeria. Now the Central Bank of Nigeria produced new Naira notes, and normally when this happens, simply means at a particular date your old Naira note will no longer be valid. Now the truth about it is people are going to the banks, going to the ATMs, and they are not dispensing cash. Banks are saying there is no money in the banks. Not old Naira notes, not new Naira notes. This simply means people in Nigeria are cash trapped. Now I spoke to one of my friends in Nigeria and a couple of other people, and reports reaching us states that he said he had he wanted to change 300,000. So he gave it to the Bureau de Change person, and the person gave him 200,000 Naira new notes. Now, normally we have POS where you insert your ATM cards and it brings out money. Normally, if you want to collect a particular amount of money, it charges like 1% or even 2%. But right now, the POS, they are charging a whooping 10%. Simply meaning if you want to collect 10,000 Naira, you have to pay 1,000 Naira. Nigeria, and it's really, really hilarious. In banks, there's catastrophe, there's calamity, people are struggling, people are crying, people are displaying, some people are going naked because there is no money in circulation. And coupled with that, there is a terrible fuel crisis. So Nigeria right now, Nigerians are really, really disheartened. They are sad because nothing is working for them. Now, away from that, let's now go over to the fuel crisis I talked about earlier. And it says smuggling. The government of Nigeria shot 270 filling stations. And the question I keep asking myself is, Benin Republic gets fuel from Nigeria. How is it possible that the country that supplies fuel is in scarcity and the countries that rely on Nigeria are not in scarcity? This is just a rhetorical question I always ask myself. Okay, I think that is enough from the pages of the Punch Nigeria. Moving away from the Punch Nigeria, let's see what is happening in the pages, or rather on the pages of the Daily Guide Ghana. Now, on the Daily Guide Ghana, the top story I am seeing is talking about murder. Let's see what is happening on the pages of the Daily Guide Ghana. All right, let's go. On the pages of the Daily Guide Ghana, the story says 12 grabbed for carjacking murder. Full stories on pages 3 of the Daily Guide Ghana. And Robert kills 3 at gold shop on the pages of the Daily Guide. And Ghana to get war college on the pages of the Daily Guide Ghana. And on the political scene, it says AFRCA joined NPP race. If you know you're curious as you want to get more stories on this, you could check the pages of the Daily Guide Ghana. Now, moving away from the Daily Guide Ghana, let's cross over to my favorite daily for today, which is the pages of the Citizen Tanzania. Now, let's get started. On the Citizen Tanzania, it's talking about Tanzania experience with Quartet Salonier on the pages of the Citizen Tanzania. And still on the Citizen Tanzania, let's move this a bit so we'll be able to see clearly. Yes, and it's saying tourism almost in full recovery on the pages of the Citizen Tanzania. The Citizen Tanzania doesn't really have so many stories today, so I'm going to have to zap away from the Citizen Tanzania. Let's see the stories making the round on the front page of the Namibian Sun. Now, on the Namibian Sun today is talking about hidden in Namibian Sea. Okay, let's go. Now, on the pages of the Namibian Sun, it says military investigates mysterious sail drone on the pages of the Namibian Sun, and it says hidden in Namibian Sea, controlled from the United States of America. That is a very, very serious situation. And still on that, it's saying all sizzle at no stick, and Ochimbi PC elections Eric Kajina on the pages of the Namibian Sun newspaper. Now, we're still on the African scene, but we're moving away from the Namibian Sun. Let's see the stories that are trending on the pages of the Guardian Post Cameroon. Now, on the Guardian Post Cameroon, it's talking about suspected killer of Martinez Zogo arrested. And it said, but the government conceals identity of arrested suspects, says others are on the run. They definitely have their reasons why they shielded the suspect. Now, still on the pages of the Guardian Post Cameroon, it says private media in shock as government allocates paltry 56 million francs CFA as subvention. I think they should be thanking their stars that the government even had it in mind to add value to them. Now, still on the pages of the Guardian Post, PMUC staker wins 53 million francs CFA on the pages of the Guardian Post Cameroon. Crossing away from the Guardian Post Cameroon, moving over to the pages of the front page Liberia. Let's see the stories that are making the rounds on the front page today. Okay, that is on the front page Liberia. Now, on the pages of the front page Liberia, the stories go thus. Let's expand this a bit. Okay, we're good to go. Now, assassination plot against Prince Johnson. Is there an assassination plot against Prince Johnson? If you're curious, you could check the pages of the front page. And still on the front page, let's read this. Prosecution awaits those connected to arms shipped to Liberia on the pages of the front page, Liberia. Let's go down. Let's see whether we have any other stories for us on the pages of the front page. I think basically that's all we have for us on today's edition of the African Newspaper Review, coming to you live and direct from Golfe TV Africa here in the city of Cotonou. And our dear viewers, this is where we'll conclude today's Newspaper Review edition. Let's go back to the news.